In 1890, the Sears Roebuck catalog sold more hand scythes than anything else in the hardware section. By 1960, most of those tools were rusting in barn corners, forgotten by the sons and daughters who once watched their fathers swing them at dawn. Number 14 on this list was so effective that John Deere studied its design before building their first mechanized version. And number 3 uses a mechanism so precise that modern engineers still cannot improve on it. These 20 tools cleared forests, broke sod, and fed a nation before electricity reached a single fence post. Subscribe, because what built this country deserves to be remembered. Let us count them down. Number 20, the broad fork. Before roto-tillers chewed through American gardens, farmers broke up compacted soil with a broad fork, a wide U-shaped steel frame with 5 to 7 heavy tines and 2 tall wooden handles. The farmer stepped onto the crossbar, driving the tines deep with body weight, then rocked backward on the handles to lift and loosen the earth without flipping it. That was the genius. Unlike a plow, the broad fork did not destroy soil structure. It opened channels for air and water while leaving earthworms and root networks intact. A good blacksmith could forge one in an afternoon from wagon spring steel, and the tool lasted decades. By the 1920s, farm families across the Appalachian foothills used broad forks to prepare kitchen gardens every spring. Children knew the rhythm: step, lean, lift, step, lean, lift, row after row until the soil breathed soft and dark beneath their bare feet. When gas-powered tillers arrived in the 1950s, the broad fork was tossed into the shed. Nobody wanted to sweat when a machine could do it faster. But the tillers pulverized the topsoil into dust, killing the organisms that made it fertile. Today, organic farmers pay $80 for a broad fork and call it revolutionary. Your great-grandfather just called it Tuesday. Number 19, the corn knife. Come September in the Midwest, the corn knife ruled the field. It was a heavy, machete-like blade about 18 inches long with a thick wooden handle, designed for one job: cutting dried corn stalks at the base so they could be bundled into shocks for winter fodder. A man with a sharp corn knife could clear an acre a day, swinging low and steady through rows that stretched to the horizon. The blade had to be heavy enough to slice clean through the tough stalk in a single stroke. Too light and you were hacking, wasting energy, falling behind. Farm wives sharpened them on whetstones the night before, the scraping sound drifting through the kitchen while the family sat quiet, knowing what dawn would bring. By the 1940s, mechanical corn binders replaced the corn knife on larger operations. But on small family farms in Missouri, Indiana, and Iowa, the knife held on through the 1950s because the binder cost more than the corn was worth. Those families still tell stories about the ache in the shoulders, the blisters that bled through work gloves, and the satisfaction of a field standing in golden shocks against the October sky. Number 18, the hay hook. Moving loose hay before the age of the square baler required a simple tool that became an extension of the farmer's own arm. The hay hook was a single curved steel prong set into a wooden handle, small enough to grip in one fist. You sank it into a mass of loose hay, pulled, and swung the load wherever it needed to go. Loading a wagon, stacking in the barn loft, feeding livestock in January when the pile was frozen solid. The hay hook did it all. Every farmhand in America carried one tucked into his belt from roughly 1850 through the early 1950s. The hook left a distinctive callus on the palm between thumb and forefinger. Old-timers could spot a hayman by his handshake. A good hook cost about 35 cents at the general store in 1920, and a man would wear through 3 or 4 in a lifetime, the handles cracking from sweat and frost. When the square baler arrived and hay came in neat tied blocks, the hook lost its purpose. But anyone who ever climbed a hay mow in August, sweat pouring, dust in the lungs, swinging that hook into the next forkful, never forgot the weight of it in their hand. Number 17, the scythe cradle. The basic scythe cut grain, but it left the stalks scattered in every direction on the ground. The scythe cradle solved that problem with an attachment of 3 or 4 long wooden fingers mounted above the blade. As the farmer swung, the cradle caught the falling grain stems and laid them in a neat row, ready for binding into sheaves. A skilled man with a cradle scythe could harvest 2 acres of wheat in a day, leaving clean windrows behind him that women and children gathered into bundles. In 1840, before McCormick's reaper reached most farms, the scythe cradle was the most important harvest tool in America. Census records from that decade show nearly every farm household in Pennsylvania, Virginia, and Ohio owned at least one. The balance had to be perfect. Too much weight on the cradle fingers, and the swing pulled left. Too little, and the grain slipped through. Farmers adjusted the tines with wedges and leather wraps until the whole assembly moved like one instrument. The sound of a cradle scythe working through ripe wheat was a low, rhythmic swish that carried across whole valleys in July. When the mechanical reaper took over after the Civil War, the scythe cradle disappeared so completely that most Americans today would not recognize one if they found it hanging in a barn. Number 16, the FROE. Splitting shingles, fence rails, and barrel staves required a tool that worked with the grain of the wood rather than against it. The froe was an L-shaped blade about 12 inches long with a wooden handle rising perpendicular from one end. You set the blade on the end of a short log, struck the back of the blade with a wooden mallet called a froe club, and then twisted the handle to peel off a clean, even split. Unlike a saw, which cut across the grain and weakened the wood, the froe followed the natural fibers, producing shingles and clapboards that shed water for decades without rotting. A cedar shake roof split with a froe could last 50 years. One cut with a saw might last 15 years. Every rural homestead from Maine to Georgia kept a froe hanging by the woodshed. Children learned to use one by age 10, splitting kindling and fence pickets as daily chores. The tool required no sharpening in the traditional sense, just a file to keep the edge keen enough to start the split. The mechanical shingle mill killed the froe by 1900 in most regions, but in the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Ozarks, families were still splitting shakes by hand into the 1940s, trusting a tool their great-grandfathers had carried west. Number 15, the walking cultivator. Before tractors pulled cultivating rigs through crop rows, farmers walked behind single-horse cultivators that straddled the row and scratched weeds from between the plants. The walking cultivator had 2 sets of adjustable shovels or sweeps mounted on a frame that the farmer guided with wooden handles, while a single horse or mule pulled it forward. Depth control was everything. Too deep and you ripped out the corn roots. Too shallow and the weeds laughed at you. A good farmer could feel the soil resistance through the handles and adjust by instinct, tilting the frame left or right to dodge close-planted stalks. By 1910, the walking cultivator was the most common piece of horse-drawn equipment in the Cotton Belt and the Corn Belt alike, with Sears selling a basic model for about $12. The smell of fresh-turned earth and horse sweat defined June mornings on every family farm. When the Farmall tractor arrived with mounted cultivators in the 1920s, the walking version was retired to the fence row. But the men who used them swore they could cultivate cleaner because they felt every root and stone through those wooden handles. A tractor driver, they said, was just guessing. First pattern break. Here is something most people never think about. The post hole digger, not the modern clamshell type you rent from the hardware store. The original was 2 flat iron blades riveted to crossed wooden handles that opened and closed like a giant pair of scissors. You drove the closed blades into the ground, spread the handles apart to grab a plug of earth, pulled it up, and dumped it. Repeat 40 or 50 times, and you had a hole deep enough for a fence post. By 1880, barbed wire was transforming the open range into fenced pasture, and every mile of fence needed a post every 8 feet. That meant roughly 660 holes per mile dug by hand. Homesteaders on the Great Plains spent entire summers digging post holes in ground that baked hard as brick by July. Blisters turned to calluses, turned to scars. A man could dig maybe 20 good holes in a day if the ground was kind. Oral histories from Kansas and Nebraska recall the monotony, the aching back, and the satisfaction of dropping that last post into the last hole and knowing the cattle would stay put. Power augers replaced the manual digger by the 1950s, but the old scissor handle digger built more miles of American fence than any machine ever will. Number 13, the draw knife. When a farmer needed to peel bark, shape a handle, or shave a beam smooth, he reached for the draw knife. Two handles set at right angles to a long, slightly curved blade. You pulled the blade toward your body across the surface of the wood, and a thin curl of shaving peeled away clean. The draw knife was the tool that shaped axe handles, wagon spokes, chair legs, and fence posts across rural America for 200 years. Every farmer was his own carpenter, and the draw knife was the bridge between the raw log and the finished piece. By 1900, a decent draw knife cost about 75 cents at the hardware store, and most farms owned 2 or 3 of different sizes. The skill was in reading the grain. Pull against it, and the blade dove deep, gouging the wood. Pull with it, and the surface came out smooth as glass. Boys learned this distinction by ruining a few handles first. The electric planer and the lathe made the draw knife unnecessary by mid-century, but the smooth, slightly irregular surface of a hand-drawn piece of wood carries a warmth that no machine can replicate. Antique dealers now sell old draw knives as wall decoration. The farmers who use them would find that baffling. Number 12, the grain flail. Before threshing machines separated grain from straw, farmers beat it out by hand with a flail. It was 2 sticks connected by a short leather strap or chain. The longer stick was the handle. The shorter one, called the swingle, did the striking. You swung the handle overhead, and the swingle whipped down onto a pile of grain spread across the barn floor. The impact knocked the kernels free from the chaff. A rhythm developed. Swing, strike, shuffle the pile, swing again. 2 men working opposite sides of the floor could thresh about 7 bushels of wheat in a day. By comparison, McCormick's early thresher handled 100 bushels in the same time. But the flail was free, required no fuel, and broke down only when the leather strap wore through. A repair that took 5 minutes and a scrap of cowhide. Farm families in the Shenandoah Valley, the Connecticut river towns, and the hill country of Tennessee used flails well into the 1870s because they could not afford the machine and did not need one. The barn floor was polished smooth from generations of flailing, the wood darkened with grain dust and boot leather. That floor told the whole story of a farm's history. When the threshing crew finally arrived with their steam-powered rig, the flail went to the rafters, and the barn floor never shone the same way again. Number 11, the sausage stuffer. Hog killing day in November was the most important food event of the rural year, and the sausage stuffer was its essential instrument. A cast iron cylinder with a hand-cranked piston forced seasoned ground pork through a narrow spout into natural casings. Families gathered before dawn to slaughter, scald, scrape, and butcher hogs that had been fattened on corn and table scraps since spring. By afternoon, the women took over. They mixed ground pork with sage, red pepper, salt, and a little brown sugar, then fed the seasoned meat into the stuffer while someone cranked the handle slow and steady. Too fast and the casing burst. Too slow and air pockets formed. The filled links were hung in the smokehouse alongside hams and bacon, curing in hickory smoke for weeks. A good stuffer cost about $3 from the Montgomery Ward catalog in 1915 and served a family for generations. The sausage it produced tasted nothing like the supermarket tubes wrapped in plastic. It tasted like smoke and sage and cold mornings and the whole family working together for something that would feed them until spring. Number 10, the root cellar ventilator. Not a tool you held in your hand, but a device that kept families alive through winter. The root cellar ventilator was a simple wooden or tin duct fitted into the ceiling of an underground storage room designed to regulate airflow and prevent the buildup of gases from stored vegetables. Without it, potatoes rotted, apples turned to mush, and cabbages fermented into something no one wanted to open a jar near. A well-ventilated root cellar could keep produce fresh from October through April. Families stored hundreds of pounds of potatoes, turnips, carrots, beets, and apples in sand-filled bins, relying on the steady, cool temperature and controlled humidity to preserve their harvest. USDA extension bulletins from the 1920s devoted entire chapters to ventilator design, specifying duct diameters, inlet heights, and baffle configurations. The farm wife checked the cellar daily, adjusting the ventilator damper based on outside temperature. Too much air in a freeze and the potatoes frosted. Too little in a warm spell and everything sweated and spoiled. When electric refrigeration and frozen food reached rural America in the 1950s, the root cellar fell into disuse. The ventilators rusted shut. The doors sagged on their hinges, but for 150 years, that simple duct was the difference between eating through winter and going hungry. Number 9, the buck saw. Firewood was not a lifestyle choice in rural America. It was survival. And the buck saw was the tool that turned logs into stove lengths faster than any other hand tool available. A rectangular wooden frame held a narrow blade under tension, like an oversized coping saw. The frame kept the blade rigid, allowing long, fast strokes that cut through hardwood with surprising speed. Two people could work a buck saw together, one pushing, one pulling, finding a rhythm that ate through oak and hickory at a pace that left both panting. By 1900, nearly every farmstead in the northern states owned at least one buck saw. The fall ritual of cutting and splitting a winter's worth of firewood, sometimes 10 cords or more, began in September and consumed weekends through November. Children stacked, fathers sawed, mothers kept the water jug full. The crosscut saw and later the chainsaw eventually replaced the buck saw for heavy timber work. But for quick cuts at the woodpile, the buck saw held on in rural kitchens and woodsheds well into the 1960s. Its light frame and cheap replacement blades made it the most practical firewood tool a small farm could own. The cream separator deserves a moment because it changed the economics of every dairy farm in America. Before the centrifugal separator arrived in the 1880s, farm wives set pans of fresh milk in the springhouse and waited 12 to 24 hours for the cream to rise. The separator did it in minutes. You poured whole milk into the bowl on top, turned the crank, and centrifugal force split the milk into cream and skim through a stack of conical discs. Cream came out one spout, skim out the other. A Delaval separator cost about $40 in 1910, a serious investment, but it paid for itself within a year. The cream went to the creamery for butter money. The skim went to the hogs. Nothing was wasted. Farm wives who once spent half their morning skimming pans now had that time back. The separator sat on a stand in the milk house, its red and black paint the brightest thing in the building. Cleaning it was the chore everyone hated. 30 or 40 discs had to be washed individually twice a day, but the money it earned kept shoes on children and seed in the ground. When bulk milk tanks and tanker trucks arrived in the 1950s, the cream separator moved to the corner, then the barn sale, then the antique shop. But for 50 years, that hand crank machine was the most important piece of equipment on any small dairy farm in America. Number 7, the adze. Shaping a log into a beam required the adze, a tool that looks like an axe turned sideways. The curved blade sat perpendicular to the handle, and the farmer swung it between his spread feet, chipping away wood in controlled bites to flatten a round log into a square timber. Every barn, cabin, and bridge built in rural America before the sawmill reached town was hewn with an adze. The skill was terrifying to watch. One miscalculated swing, and the blade buried itself in a shin bone. But experienced hewers worked with a rhythm that was almost musical. the chips flying in arcs, the logs slowly squaring under their hands. A broad-faced adze for heavy hewing cost about $2 in 1880. The narrow-faced adze for finer finishing work cost slightly less. Both required constant sharpening and a confidence in your own swing that only came from years of practice. When portable sawmills reached most communities by the 1890s, the adze became unnecessary for construction, but it remained in use for shaping troughs, dugout canoes, and barn door lintels well into the 20th century. The hand-hewn beams in old barns still bear the scalloped adze marks, each one a signature of the man who swung it. Number 6, the apple butter paddle. Apple butter making was an all-day community event in the rural South and Appalachia, and the paddle was the tool that made it possible. It was a flat wooden board about 4 feet long with a handle at one end and holes drilled through the blade to reduce resistance. You stood over a copper kettle set above an open fire and stirred continuously for 8 to 12 hours as 40 or 50 bushels of apples cooked down into a thick spice spread. The holes in the paddle let the butter pass through instead of pushing it, preventing scorching on the bottom of the kettle. Stop stirring for 5 minutes and the batch burned. An entire year's worth of apple butter ruined. Families took shifts. Neighbors came to help. Children played in the yard while the adults traded stories and stirred. The smell of cinnamon, cloves, and cooking apples carried for a quarter mile. A single kettle could produce enough apple butter to last a family through winter, spread on biscuits every morning. The paddle itself was often carved by a grandfather, the handle worn smooth by generations of hands. When commercial apple butter appeared in grocery stores in the 1940s, the kettles cooled and the paddles were hung on the wall. But in parts of West Virginia, and the Carolinas, apple butter stirrings still happen every fall. The paddle comes down from its nail, the fire gets lit, and for one day, 1890 is not that far away. Number 5, the single tree. Every animal-powered operation on the American farm depended on the single tree, a horizontal wooden or iron bar that connected the horse's harness traces to the implement behind it. Without it, the pull was uneven and the equipment tracked crooked. The single tree pivoted at its center point, allowing the horse to move naturally while distributing the load evenly. A double tree connected 2 single trees for a team of horses. A triple tree handled 3. The blacksmith made them from hickory or ash, shaping the bar and fitting the iron hardware. A well-balanced single tree meant the difference between a straight furrow and a wandering mess. Every farm kept spares because a cracked single tree in the middle of plowing season meant a lost day. When tractors replaced horses in the 1940s and the 1950s, single trees piled up in fence corners and barn lofts. Children who never saw a working draft horse used them as makeshift seesaws. Today they hang in country restaurants as decoration, stripped of the purpose that once made them indispensable. Number 4, the grubbing hoe. Clearing new ground in timbered America was the hardest work the frontier demanded, and the grubbing hoe was the tool that did it. A heavy, narrow blade set on a stout handle designed to chop through roots, pry out stumps, and break the tangled mat of forest floor into something a plow could turn. The blade was thicker and heavier than a garden hoe, built to take punishment that would snap a lighter tool in half. Homesteaders on the Piedmont, in the Ozarks, and across the upper Midwest spent years grubbing out land one root at a time. A family might clear 2 or 3 acres a year, burning the brush, pulling the stumps with ox chains, and grubbing out every last root until the soil was finally free. The grubbing hoe weighed about 5 pounds, and swinging it from dawn to dusk left arms trembling and backs locked stiff. Farm journals from the 1840s recorded the progress in painful detail. Grubbed the north acre, broke the hoe handle, made another. Children too small for the hoe gathered roots into piles for burning. It was land made by hand, one swing at a time. When dynamite and later bulldozers made land clearing faster, the grubbing hoe retired. But every cleared field in the eastern United States began with one. Number 3, The hand crank corn sheller. Feeding livestock through winter required shelled corn, and before electric motors reached the farm, the hand crank sheller did the job with an elegance that still impresses engineers. You fed a dried ear of corn into a cast iron hopper, turned the crank, and a set of geared teeth stripped every kernel from the cob in about 2 seconds. The kernels fell into a bucket below. The bare cob shot out the side. A child could operate it. An adult could shell a bushel in 15 minutes. The mechanism used a spiral gear pattern that applied pressure evenly around the ear, removing kernels without crushing them. Modern engineers who have examined the design note that the gear ratio and tooth spacing are optimized to a degree that suggests decades of iterative refinement by foundry workers who never heard the word engineering. A Black Hawk or Enterprise sheller cost about $4 in 1900 and required no maintenance beyond an occasional drop of oil. When electric and tractor-powered shellers arrived, the hand crank version moved to the back of the corn crib, but it had already shelled more corn than any machine in American history, one ear at a time, turned by hands that built this country from the ground up. Number 2, the crosscut saw. Before the chainsaw screamed through American timber, the crosscut saw whispered. 2 men on opposite ends of a flexible steel blade, 6 to 8 feet long, pulling in alternating strokes through logs thick enough to build a barn. The teeth were filed in a pattern called a champion tooth or a lance tooth, designed to cut on both the push and pull strokes. A well-filed crosscut in experienced hands could drop a 2-foot oak in under 10 minutes. Logging camps across the Pacific Northwest, the Great Lakes states, and the Appalachian Mountains ran entirely on crosscut saws from the 1850s through the 1940s. The saw required 2 people in perfect rhythm. If one partner pushed while the other pulled, the blade buckled and the teeth jammed. The sound of a crosscut working through green timber was a steady musical rasp that echoed through forest valleys and signaled progress measured in inches. Sawyers filed their own blades every evening by lantern light, each man knowing exactly how his saw liked to cut. A Diston or Siemens crosscut cost about $6 and lasted a career if properly maintained. When the chainsaw arrived after World War II, the crosscut vanished from the woods almost overnight. But the men who used them maintained that a crosscut in good hands was quieter, safer, and cut a cleaner kerf than any screaming machine. Number 1, the walking plow. No tool built rural America more literally than the walking plow. From the wooden moldboard plows of the colonial era to the steel plows that John Deere began forging in 1837, this single implement turned wilderness into farmland across an entire continent. The farmer gripped 2 wooden handles, leaned his weight into the beam, and followed a horse or mule as the share sliced through sod, and the moldboard turned it over in a long, continuous ribbon. The first cut into virgin prairie was the hardest. Grass roots, woven thick as rope, fought the blade. The plow bucked and jumped. The horse strained. But when that first furrow turned, dark soil glistening where grass had stood unbroken for 10,000 years, a farm was born. By 1860, more than 2 million walking plows were in use across America. The farmer walked 10 miles behind his plow for every acre he turned. A 40-acre field meant 400 miles on foot, staring at the back end of a horse. The aches settled into hips and shoulders and never fully left. Children guided the horse while fathers held the plow, learning the rhythm of the land before they could read. The riding plow and then the tractor eventually freed farmers from walking, but the furrows those men cut by hand are still visible in old fields, faint ridges in the earth that mark where someone once walked and sweated and broke the ground that fed a nation. These 20 tools ask a simple question: what did we lose when we stopped using our hands? The broad fork and the walking plow taught patience. The hay hook and the grubbing hoe taught endurance. The apple butter paddle taught community. Not one of them plugged into a wall or burned a drop of gasoline. They ran on muscle, skill, and the stubborn belief that hard work would be enough. Share which tool your family still remembers. And if one of them is hanging in your barn right now, do not sell it at the yard sale. That is not a relic. That is a piece of the country itself.